Well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our speakers today, Sarah Gersten from the Last Prisoner Project and State Representative Anthony Nolan of New London. Today, we're going to be talking a bit about HB 5457, which is a bill that will help us reduce the amount of folks that are currently incarcerated or on supervision for cannabis crimes. And my name is Jason Ortiz. I'm the Executive Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. We are a student-led organization that trains young folks on how to change the drug policies in their communities, whatever may be impacting them, and specifically trying to reduce incarceration of everyone. And so this is particularly important to me as somebody that was arrested for cannabis possession as a high school student, growing up in Norwich, Connecticut back in 2000, was arrested for having simple possession of 2 small joints and thrown out of school for a year, thrown into the criminal justice system. And luckily, thanks to the work of activists, I was able to go to college, was able to find organizations like SSDP to help me change laws. And now, after having helped with the legalization fight in a couple of years ago, the laws regarding youth will be different and folks won't be as penalized as they were when I was younger. And so that's why I'm particularly excited to be here today to talk about HB 5457, because as someone who has been impacted, I know that a small policy change can really radically change somebody's life. And as long as that we're going to have legal, safe cannabis in the state of Connecticut, and there's going to be business opportunities for folks to get involved, we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that those who were negatively impacted by the war on drugs also get the relief that they need to be able to become full members of society. And so we're going to be starting with this particular bill. We're going to hear a few words from State Representative Anthony Nolan on why he decided to introduce this legislation, and then get into the nuts and bolts with Sarah Gersten of the Last Prisoner Project on what exactly the bill can do, what we would like it to do, and how we can all get involved to make sure that it passes. So I'm going to kick it off first with State Representative Anthony Nolan of New London. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do for a living, and why you decided to introduce this legislation.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jason and Sarah, for being on this webinar. It is in regards to an important topic, as Jason just explained, HB 5457, trying to alleviate some of our incarcerated individuals and get them out. We have had a drastic change in marijuana laws. And I think because of this change and because of some of the ways that our friends, families, neighbors had been arrested previously to this law being changed, we need to start having some better thinking in regards to how we deal or dealt with those that are incarcerated. So it is very imperative for us to push to try and get as many people out that are incarcerated in regards to marijuana. It's legal now, so people shouldn't be held to that standard in which they once were when it was not. And we need to make that swift change, and this bill is going to help us do that. I understand that there are different prerogatives or personalities in regards to this. I just happen to be in a unique position as a law enforcement officer in the city of New London, Connecticut, and now going on a 3rd term as a state representative. So though I have had incidents in where I had to arrest people for the violation of marijuana, now those same people, or there are still those that are incarcerated that we need to alleviate of that incarceration to help try and change and make their lifestyles better. And the first way to do that is to get them out of incarceration and try and set them up so that they can have a much better way of living. So I'm looking forward to Sarah telling us a little bit more. And Jason, I really appreciate you. I've known you for quite some time now. And it's good to work with you guys to try and make sure that we make this change because this is definitely something we need to do.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you for putting up with me constantly talking about this issue even before it was legal, and working with us when we were actually passing the legalization bill to make sure that it did include criminal justice reforms. And while of course we have a lot more work to do, we did make a lot of progress. There's a significant number of expungements and records that have been cleared recently, and so we do want to know that things are progressing in the right direction. But also on January 10th, we had our very large cannabis industry open up. There were thousands of people that went and purchased cannabis legally throughout the state of Connecticut. And it is a bit, Ironic or hypocritical, I would say, right? That we have folks being able to have these large businesses making millions of dollars, and we still have folks incarcerated for doing much less than they're actually able to do now in the legal space. And so, I think one of the big things that has always been why I'm very excited to work with the Last Prisoner Project is we share the ideal that as long as there's even one person still incarcerated for cannabis crimes, we must work to get them out. And so figuring out exactly how many people are currently incarcerated and how many folks we can help is going to be a big part of this work. But yeah, I want to kick it over to Sarah. Tell us a little bit more about the Last Prisoner Project, how you got involved in this particular work and why Connecticut has an opportunity to really do some real good with HB 5457.
Thank you so much, Jason, and thank you, Representative Nolan, so much for being a champion of this issue. As Jason mentioned, I'm the executive director of the Last Prisoner Project. We are a national nonpartisan organization dedicated to cannabis criminal justice reform. So that means ensuring that as states are legalizing cannabis, they're also providing retroactive relief to both ensure that no one remains incarcerated for cannabis-related offenses, no one is serving a term of supervision for cannabis-related offenses, and any cannabis convictions are cleared from individuals' records so that the myriad collateral consequences that come with a conviction don't continue to have so many negative effects on those that have been most impacted by cannabis prohibition. I'm really excited about the potential to pass this legislation and to do this work in Connecticut. Though I lead a national organization, I am a resident of Connecticut. I'm here in West Hartford. So I'm really excited to ensure that Connecticut does the right thing and that beyond just legalizing, we are ensuring that those past harms are being redressed. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and give a little presentation on why resentencing or sentence modification is such an important component of legalization, what the current landscape looks like here in Connecticut, and why this specific piece of legislation is necessary. So, as we've discussed today, Connecticut has fully legalized. We now have an operational adult use market for cannabis, and the state is poised to make millions or billions of dollars in tax revenue off of the sale of cannabis. Of course, there are entrepreneurs in the state and from out of state that are now able to profit millions or billions of dollars off of this activity that others are still suffering the harms of prohibition, including serving terms of incarceration in custody or terms of supervision because of that exact same activity. So of course, we have this fundamental injustice that while some are profiting off of the sale of cannabis, others are still suffering. And of course, as Representative Nolan stated, our first priority really should be to ensure that no one remains in prison for this activity. So it is critically important that we get this piece of legislation passed. Here in Connecticut, we have several different options for how someone could reduce their sentence, but none of them effectuate release in the way that sentence modification can. So these are the different options currently. Parole is something, of course, that is afforded to most individuals serving a sentence, but once you're paroled, you're still serving a term of supervision. So that to us doesn't truly equate to full freedom. We want people to be released and not still having to be on supervised release. Clemency is another option. We'll talk about why that's not really effective. So resentencing is really the gold standard for this. So right now in Connecticut, there is a pardon and parole board. They oversee the clemency process, and commutations is the piece of clemency that could actually reduce someone's sentence. Here in Connecticut, to be eligible for clemency, you have to be serving a term of 10 years and you have to have already served 10 years of that sentence. So that's a very limited eligibility for a commutation. You can ask to waive that eligibility requirement, but the board would have to approve that. Of course, there's a lot of discretion that goes into that. And it's unlikely that someone would get that approval and then they still have to go through the process to actually receive that commutation. So again, resentencing is really the best option and the best pathway for someone who is incarcerated for a cannabis offense. And again, given that legalization has happened, it is so important. And really, as Representative Nolan said, our public perception of cannabis has shifted. This is activity that we no longer see as criminal. And so beyond just legalizing and making sure that moving forward, this activity is no longer criminalized, it is just as important to provide this retroactive relief and to ensure that individuals who were previously incarcerated under a law that we no longer think is just or fair are also receiving that relief. I do want to quickly point out the difference between resentencing and record clearance. Earlier this year, Governor Lamont announced that 40,000 plus individuals had their records expunged. That goes to record clearance. Again, a really important piece of redressing the past harms of prohibition, but it doesn't actually effectuate release for anyone. That is a mechanism that clears records for people that have already served their sentences or maybe never served a term of incarceration. So really important, really great that the state automatically cleared those records, but that does not release anyone from incarceration or reduce a term of supervision. So right now, there's a big policy gap in terms of resentencing in Connecticut. Connecticut really has no comprehensive process for resentencing. And what we do have baked into our statute involves a really high degree of influence from stakeholders, even outside of the judicial branch. And it's got very strict eligibility criteria. There was a law that passed very recently that expanded eligibility for individuals to apply for resentencing and bypass prosecutorial approval. So another aspect of the current resentencing law in Connecticut is that anyone who petitions for resentencing has to get approval from the state's attorney's office that originally tried their case to even get to that hearing. Of course, if you're a prosecutor who has sentenced someone, it's highly unlikely that you're going to grant that approval. So what this recent piece of legislation did was expanded eligibility for people to bypass that, but it is only for anyone who was sentenced because of a trial. That's the vast minority of cases, or someone who's serving a term of 7 years or less. And even with that new eligibility process, again, there's very little oversight over this. We really have no idea how many people are asking for that approval from state's attorneys. We have no idea how many are being granted. The law that recently passed had no statutory oversight to make sure that this is actually functioning. These hearings are happening. There's no timeline. So even if someone got to a hearing, there's no timeline for judges to actually hear these. There's no reporting requirements, again, to see how this is functioning, if it's operating correctly. So there's really a huge gap that we need to fill if we want there to be the ability for people with cannabis sentences to petition or to automatically get, ideally, a resentencing hearing. So this is what we are hoping this specific piece of legislation would do. And it really is sort of the gold standard for what we like to see in terms of resentencing nationally. And so the process would be that sentence reviews are initiated by the state. The state would proactively identify individuals who have cannabis offenses as the reason they are incarcerated. So I want to make clear this bill is not intended to provide resentencing opportunities for people who maybe have a different offense, but they also have a cannabis offense on their record. This is strictly for individuals who, but for the criminality of cannabis and cannabis-related activity, would never have been incarcerated or would not now be serving a term of supervision. So ideally, the state identifies those individuals, and then they automatically get to that hearing. They bypass that approval from the state's attorneys. And there's a presumption that if they meet that criteria of having primarily a cannabis offense, there's a presumption for release. So that's intended to limit the influence of outside stakeholders and ensure that individuals are actually getting the relief that they deserve. So eligibility for this, again, would be individuals who are serving primarily a cannabis offense. Those would be the ones that the state can identify. But ideally, we would also include people who maybe were serving a different offense, but then they violated their term of supervision because of cannabis activity that is now legal. There also could be other offenses such as money laundering, where obviously that's not specifically a cannabis offense, but someone might be able to prove that the underlying activity is related to cannabis, or again, but for the criminality of cannabis, they would never have been sentenced. And so for those cases, if the state can't identify those individuals, there should at least be an opportunity to petition for that hearing if you are able to show, again, that cannabis or cannabis-related activity is truly the reason why you are incarcerated or serving a term of supervision. So again, really the goal of this is that the process is transparently monitored. We have reporting requirements from the state, and that individuals receive the relief that they deserve in a fair and timely manner. So we would also want to build in statutory timeframes for this as well. So just to recap the big policy recommendations here and what we are aiming to accomplish with the bill. We want to establish a state-initiated process, so the onus is on the state to identify at least those that have that cannabis offense as primarily what's on their record. Establish clear judicial guidance, again, having a presumption for release if someone can show that they meet the eligibility criteria, but have a broad eligibility scheme so that, again, even if you're not automatically going to a hearing, if you can show that I don't have a cannabis specific offense, but really cannabis is the reason why I've been criminalized, why I'm serving the sentence, you can still at least petition for release. Have timelines built in so that people aren't just left waiting for a decision. Again, right now, there's no judicial timeframe on when someone gets a decision for a resentencing hearing. We want to make sure these people are getting relief as soon as possible, especially again, because now we've legalized. We have a fully operational adult use market, and really this is something that should have happened from the jump. And again, establish regular reporting requirements so that the state is letting us know, letting the people know, is this working? Are people actually getting out? So that's really what we're aiming to do with this bill. And this isn't a novel idea. This is something that many states that have legalized cannabis are doing. New York, New Jersey, states that have more recently legalized have all built in some type of resentencing process. And even Missouri, which just legalized in November, not only built that into their ballot initiative, but they're already hearing sentence modification hearings in Missouri. So this is absolutely something that we should be able to accomplish in the state of Connecticut. It is 100% in the interest of justice and fairness to get this done. So again, I'm so thankful to Jason and to Representative Nolan for championing this really important piece of legislation.
Thank you, Sarah, for laying it out so well. And, again, as somebody that's been involved both on the criminal justice side of getting arrested and then the policymaking side of the business side of cannabis, we definitely still have a lot of work to do, making sure that we're healing the damage done by the war on drugs. I'm really excited to hear that about Missouri. Missouri might then be the first state that was actually proactive about it, like from the get-go, because up to this point, there were no other states. And so unfortunately, that means 20 different states and DC legalized the sales of cannabis, but none of them had released anyone from prison in the process. And so, it's a little surprising that we're in this situation, but I guess that's why we have folks like State Representative Nolan to make sure Connecticut cleans up all the rest of the pieces of justice that come with ending the war on our communities. But Representative Nolan, I wanted to kick it back to you, see if you had any initial thoughts of what the details were about HB 5457, but also how can members of the public best advocate and get support for this bill if they support letting folks out of incarceration for cannabis crimes?
Well, Sarah, that was an excellent PowerPoint slide that you just presented. And I think those are some of the things that we have to use to educate our community, because we do not have enough education going out in regards to this and other things that we're trying to fight for. And to some of you, it might sound funny, me being a police officer, fighting to get people out of jail that did wrong at a time. Well, you know, there's a big difference, you know, when it's connected to the war on drugs. And when we're trying to fix what was broken centuries ago that continue to happen in our communities. And by us legalizing marijuana and making millions of dollars off of it, but yet keeping people incarcerated for the same thing, the same way that we're benefiting, is just unjust. And we have to break that cycle. And that's where we have to change the culture in regards to how it was a long time ago and update it to making it so that it helps people versus incarcerate them. We all know that at the time that they were doing it, it was wrong. We all know that. But, you know, there are some, there have been some attempts to change the dynamics of marijuana from centuries ago, but yet still, it was still something that people were penalized for. And we all know that some of the small amounts of marijuana are really, or were really not a large, big deal, I guess you can say. But yet people got penalized like it was a big deal. And we need to break that cycle again. Sarah touched on some great things when she touched on about being transparent and giving relief, not just relief, immediate relief, a relief that takes people out of incarceration. And that is what we must do. I've got calls from many constituents in regards, well, how can we make sure that legislators fight hard for this and get on it? I said, well, you have to contact your legislators first of all. I think the New London community is doing a great job in connecting to try and let me know their thoughts and feelings in regards to changing the laws for those that are incarcerated. So that is what I'm going to ask those that are watching to reach out to your state reps. If you're wherever you are in Connecticut, your state rep is going to know that this bill is in there. You have to sometimes give that gentle reminder because there are thousands of bills that are submitted. But I hope that this could be one of the priorities that we're fighting to get people out. So I'm asking you to reach out to your legislators and let them know that this bill is in, and we need to work it through the system so that it can be put on the floor and voted for. You know, those people that are incarcerated for marijuana should not be incarcerated. It's such an unjust, and we need to change that.
Absolutely, bro. I'm with you. And I think this is the opportunity for the public to get involved and start to broaden this education across the state. You know, we've had a lot of discussions about different types of cannabis policies, some things we wanted to do a couple of years ago that didn't get done, right? Well, now is the time to re-engage with your state representatives. They all know the issue is going to be discussed, right, to one or another. And so being able to host community conversations in your community and invite your state representative to be there. I know SSDP and myself and the Last Prisoner Project and Sarah would be happy to support those efforts, to be able to speak to the details, be able to speak with your rep directly. And so make sure you reach out to all the different organizations in Connecticut that are working on this issue. You know, the ACLU, CATAL, lots of other organizations do criminal justice work, and we need all hands on deck to really get this one done. But we are sitting here in a situation where someone who is arrested and a current police officer agree that we should move forward on getting folks out of prison that are currently there and making our communities whole and getting real true freedom. I think that's one point that Sarah mentioned earlier that we forget is, you know, you might be let out of prison, but if you're under supervision, a cannabis offense or failing a drug test or something can get you in a lot of trouble, right? And so there's a lot of aspects of this. There's a lot of people that are currently affected by these particular policies and procedures that you may not expect that are currently being impacted, right? And so we're also looking for folks and state representatives to help us find out who is being currently impacted, right? Do you know somebody in your community that is currently under supervision or failed and had an issue with parole or probation because of this? Because we'd love to speak with them, figure out how we can get whatever assistance they can currently get, but also have them share their stories, right? And share the impact of these laws with their state representatives. So that's the other piece. Definitely, if you know people that would be beneficiaries of this policy or folks that are currently being impacted by cannabis laws, let us know, reach out to us, and we want to support those folks as much as possible. And so, yeah, you know, definitely contacting your rep, hosting educational forums in your communities, reaching out to the students in universities to hold educational forums is going to be a big part of this. But the next step is we need enough co-sponsors on this bill in order to get a hearing in the Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee is the space where most criminal justice bills are heard, and then we would be able to mobilize each other and the public to actually speak and have hearings and testimonies and really put on record the impact of these laws. And so that's kind of the next step. Contact your rep, host a community conversation, and then help us get co-sponsors so that we can get a hearing in the judiciary and move this along the legislative process. But Sarah, I know you've been doing some work and trying to figure out exactly how many folks have been impacted. I don't know if you have any further thoughts of data or information, or maybe even academic support that some of our universities or other folks that work in the space might be able to help you get to be more effective at really narrowing down exactly who can most benefit.
So the biggest difficulty with the data in Connecticut is that the way our statute is written doesn't carve out marijuana as a specific offense in statute. It's baked in with other controlled substances. There's one marijuana offense that we could carve out. So we should be able to at least get that data from DOC on anyone who might be impacted by that. But DOC and the state, of course, have access to people's dockets, their arrest records. So this is information that they could ascertain, again, if there was enough pressure from people and concerned citizens and lawmakers to actually look into this and figure out, what is the scope of the problem? How many people need to see this relief? And as Jason said, even if one person is still in prison for cannabis, that's one person too many. That's one family too many. That's one community too many. So any help that academics, the state can give us in making that determination would be incredible. But we know that there are people still impacted by this. So regardless, the work needs to get done.
And that is one of the more important things that we have to try and do. And I know that we'll put it on the shoulders of some up here, trying to find the right data or trying to get the data, because sometimes it's something that people can't reach outside of the legislature. So we have to make an effort on ourselves to try and make sure that we have a little bit more accuracy when it comes to those crimes at the time. And like Sarah said, one of the biggest cliffs to climb is that the marijuana statute is baked into other what do you call it, like subsidies of the law, which kind of makes it challenging sometimes, but doesn't mean that it's impossible. Everything's possible, and those are the things that we need to make sure that we look into a little bit better on our side also. So I will say that, because that's the only way that we can get more of an accurate number.
And I was surprised when they said 40,000 records were going to be expunged. And the immediate thought I had is, well, then how many folks are still on probation? If there's 40,000 that finished it, there's still a lot of folks impacted. And so could be thousands, could be hundreds, could be 5, right? But again, even if it's 5, even if it's 1, it's still unjust to have this on the books, and we don't want to be putting more people in the future either, right? And so making sure that we're doing this in a robust, comprehensive way, addressing the collateral consequences of the war on drugs, like employment and parental rights and housing. There's all kinds of impacts that we're going to hopefully address through this process. But we need your help. We need you to contact your state representative to ask them to co-sponsor HB 5457 and make sure we get a hearing in the judiciary. But that's been a fantastic overview. I'll kick it over to each of y'all for just final thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up and start hitting the streets and making sure we get some co-sponsors. But I'm going to do final thoughts from Representative Nolan, Sarah, and then I'll close it out.
I think it's a matter of just educating one another, making sure that we have an understanding of how much of a burden this is on those who are still incarcerated, when we're now making money off the marijuana that they have been incarcerated. So I think that education is a great thing. And then I think making sure that we get those that are incarcerated out. So I look forward to fighting with you guys. Like I said, as funny as it sounds coming from a police officer, we need to make the culture change that are needed in order to make it fair for everyone now.
Thank you, Representative. Sarah?
And I think having Jason yourself, being an impacted person here with Representative Nolan and the position that he holds, it shows that this really is an issue that has bipartisan support. Again, it kind of hits at our fundamental notions of justice and fairness that we just know that it's wrong to have someone sitting in prison, taken away from their family, that community suffering for the exact same thing that others are profiting off of, and something that we didn't spend a ton of time on today, but that we know and is really obvious. Again, from the data from who's been impacted, of course, the people that are profiting now in Connecticut are mostly white people. The people that have been impacted by this, the people that are sitting in prison or still serving terms of supervision, are mostly people of color. So again, it goes to basic notions of fairness, but also to redress the racial disparities rampant in our criminal legal system. This is such an important tool that we can use to try to redress that.
Absolutely. And so thank you both for your time. Thank you, Sarah, for your expertise. Thank you, Representative Nolan, for your leadership. My name is Jason Ortiz, the Executive Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. You can reach me at jason@ssdp.org, and we'll include all the other contacts when we post this live. And again, reach out to your state representatives. You can go to ct.gov to find who your representatives are. Ask them to co-sponsor HB 5457. If you're able to host a community conversation, I'd be happy to help you. And then with your help, we can get a hearing in the judiciary, get this to the floor, and make it law in the state of Connecticut. So again, thank you both for your time. Thank you everybody for watching, and be in touch so we can make sure this is a success. So thanks again, and take care, everybody.